When most rock bands make it big, the first thing that they do is get louder. Success tends to mean expansion, bigger stages, bigger sounds, and bigger egos. But the White Stripes moved in the opposite direction. As their fame exploded, they kept stripping things away. And it wasn't just an aesthetic, it wasn't just marketing. For Jack and Meg White, simplicity was a mission statement, a creative philosophy carved into every chord, every drum beat, and every choice that they made. In an era with endless possibilities, the White Stripes were almost religious in their refusal to complicate things. They limited themselves on purpose. No bass guitar, no backup musicians, and no elaborate setups. Just Jack, Meg, and whatever noise they could pull from a guitar and a drum kit. They even imposed visual restrictions, never stepping away from the strict color palette that they would be known for, by only wearing red, white, and black. Coupled with this was a minimalistic stage presence. At a White Stripe show, there was no sprawling light shows and no complicated set pieces. If it couldn't be played by two people, it didn't happen.
We are gonna be friends. I can tell that we are gonna be friends.
This was a band that believed that limitations didn't hold you back. In fact, they set you free. Jack White once explained it in this way. Telling yourself you can only do something with one hand tied behind your back, that forces you to think differently and to find new ways of doing things. And that philosophy wasn't just theoretical. You could hear it in the White Stripes' earliest songs. Fell in Love with a Girl, for example. It's a frantic, breathless sprint under 2 minutes long, barely held together by Jack's jagged guitar and Meg's pounding floor tom. While Dead Leaves in the Dirty Ground turns three basic chords into something that feels towering and haunted.
Dead leaves in the dirty ground when I know you're not around. Shiny tops and soda pops when I hear your lips make a sound.
Then their biggest song, Seven Nation Army, is practically a musical riddle. It's just one riff, repeated and mutated, using an old trick with a pedal to make Jack's guitar sound like a bass. They didn't bring in a new instrument, they just bent the old ones until they sounded like something else. And it's tempting to think that the White Stripes' simplicity was born from necessity, that maybe they just didn't have the resources early on to sound bigger. But that's not necessarily true, because even when the money and the technology were there, Jack and Meg stayed loyal to the idea that less is more. And in some ways, it's a lesson that Jack White learned a long time before he ever plugged into a fuzz pedal. Before Jack White fell in love with distortion and ancient Delta blues records, he fell in love with the Beatles. He once said he wished he could go back and hear them again for the first time, to experience that shock of something so raw, so bright, and so immediate. His admiration of the Beatles has even been translated into a fun party trick where he can name a Beatles song just from the first second or two.
Lady Madonna. And your Birkin sing. Julia. From me to you.
Now those early Beatles records weren't dense or complicated. They were fast, simple, and direct. 2 guitars, a bass, a drum kit, and a voice full of reckless hope. Songs like Please Please Me and She Loves You weren't weighed down with layers, they were built to hit you in the chest in under 3 minutes. And Jack wasn't just trying to sound like that, he was chasing that same feeling. The alchemy of doing something simple so well that it feels bigger than the sum of its parts. And like the Beatles, the White Stripes knew that when you strip away the extras, what's left better be powerful enough to survive on its own. And that's exactly what made them so magnetic. At a time when popular music was increasingly saturated with Pro Tools edits, auto-tune, and wall-to-wall production, the White Stripes' ragged two-person assault sounded almost rebellious. And they decided not to polish their mistakes out. In fact, they celebrated them. Was there a drum fill that didn't land perfectly? Was there a solo that spiraled out a little too far? No big deal. Moments where the energy outran the technique, all of it stayed in, and all of it mattered. And their simplicity wasn't laziness, it was just a declaration that this is enough and we are enough. The White Stripes became the face of a new wave of garage rock revivalists. There was a mythic quality to them, from the colors to the fabricated story about Jack and Meg being siblings, and we can't forget the almost childlike purity that they projected. By doing less, they became larger than life. And when they decided to walk away, they did it the only way that made sense. Simply, quietly, and without fanfare. Even in their ending, they resisted the urge to drag things out. Just the music left behind like a letter slipped under a door. And today, you can still hear them everywhere, within the raw edges of modern garage rock, and within the fierce minimalism of indie bands who refuse to overproduce. And we can't forget about Jack White's own solo work, where he still wrestles with the tension between tradition and innovation. But there's something about the White Stripes that remains singular. They didn't just sound simple, they believed in simplicity. Not as a shortcut, but as a sacred act. They taught us that a guitar and a drum kit in the right hands could still set the world on fire. And they showed that when you cut everything else away, all that's left is the truth. And the truth is louder than anything.